World War II is often remembered as a war of massive battles, sweeping offensives, and overwhelming force. But history didn't turn on explosions alone. It turned on decisions. Quiet decisions. Risky decisions. And choices made with incomplete information, often far from the front lines. In this video, we're breaking down the key decisions that changed the course of World War II. Not just what happened, but why it happened, and how close the world came to a very different outcome. Because if even one of these decisions had gone another way, the modern world might not exist as we know it. World War II was not inevitable in the way it sometimes feels in hindsight. Between 1939 and 1945, leaders were constantly choosing between speed and caution, morality and necessity, certainty and risk. Some of those choices saved lives and others cost millions. And most were made without knowing how history would judge them. Decision 1. Delaying confrontation in Europe. In the late 1930s, Europe stood at a crossroads. Germany had violated treaties, rearmed openly, and expanded its influence. Yet many leaders still believed another total war could be avoided. The trauma of World War I was fresh. Entire generations had been lost. Economies were fragile. And the idea of another global conflict felt unthinkable. So when Germany made aggressive moves, reoccupying territory, pressuring neighbors, responses were cautious. The decision wasn't rooted in weakness alone. It was rooted in fear of escalation. Leaders hoped that negotiation, concessions, and delay might preserve peace. But delay came with consequences. By the time war finally broke out in full, Germany had gained time to strengthen its military, refine its strategies, and consolidate power. The choice to wait rather than confront early shifted the balance. When war arrived, it arrived on Germany's terms. Historians still debate whether earlier resistance could have prevented a wider conflict. What's certain is that hesitation shaped the battlefield before the first shots were fired, and it established a pattern that would repeat throughout the war. Decisions made to avoid catastrophe sometimes made it worse. Decision 2. The choice to fight on after early defeat. In 1940, much of Western Europe fell with shocking speed. Military doctrines collapsed. Alliances fractured, and one nation stood alone. At that moment, there was a real choice to be made: to negotiate or to fight on. The costs of continued resistance were clear. Bombing campaigns, economic strain, and the very real possibility of invasion. Negotiation, on the other hand, promised survival, but at a price. The decision to continue fighting reshaped the entire war. It forced Germany into a prolonged conflict rather than a quick consolidation of power. It preserved a base for future operations. And it ensured that the war remained truly global. This decision wasn't universally popular at the time. Many believed resistance was futile. But choosing defiance over compromise changed everything. It bought time. Time for alliances to form. Time for industries to mobilize. Time for the balance of power to shift. Without that choice, there would have been no later liberation campaigns. No second fronts, and no path back into occupied Europe. Sometimes, history turns not on victory, but on refusal to surrender. By the midpoint of the war, the world had changed. The conflict was no longer regional. It was industrial, ideological, and global. But the most decisive choices were still ahead. Decision 3. Opening a second front. As the war dragged on, pressure mounted to open a new front in Europe. The question wasn't whether to do it, but when. An early assault risked disaster. Troops were untested. Logistics were incomplete. Air superiority was uncertain. A delay, however, meant prolonging the war and the suffering that came with it. This was not just a military decision. It was a political one. Every month of delay meant millions more lives affected by occupation and combat. But rushing could mean catastrophic failure. The eventual decision balanced preparation against urgency. When the invasion finally came, it succeeded not because it was inevitable, but because it was timed. The consequences were immediate. Resources were split. Momentum shifted. And the war's end became imaginable for the first time. Historians often focus on the landings themselves, but the real turning point was the decision not to rush and not to wait too long. Timing became the weapon. Decision 4. Prioritizing industrial warfare. One of the least dramatic but most decisive choices of the war happened far from combat. It was the decision to fight an industrial war. Factories became weapons. Supply lines became battlefields. Production targets mattered as much as territory. This decision reshaped strategy. Rather than focusing solely on immediate victories, leaders committed to overwhelming output. Aircraft, ships, vehicles, and supplies on a scale never seen before. The short-term costs were enormous. Entire economies were redirected. Civilian life was transformed. But the long-term effect was decisive. Wars of attrition favor those who can replace losses faster than the enemy. By prioritizing industrial capacity, the balance slowly but irreversibly shifted. This wasn't a glamorous decision. It didn't produce dramatic headlines, but it ensured that setbacks could be absorbed and victories sustained. In the end, production didn't just support the war, it decided it. Decision 5. Intelligence over instinct. As the conflict expanded, leaders faced another choice. Trust instinct or trust information. Advances in intelligence gathering changed how decisions were made. Intercepted communications, strategic deception, and coordinated analysis offered unprecedented insight into enemy plans. But intelligence is only powerful if it's believed. There were moments when warnings were ignored, moments when information arrived too late, and moments when acting on intelligence required enormous trust. When leaders chose to rely on intelligence rather than intuition, outcomes shifted. Attacks were anticipated. Resources were positioned. Surprises became rarer. This decision didn't eliminate uncertainty, but it reduced it. And in a war defined by chaos, even partial clarity was a powerful advantage. As the war approached its final phase, one last decision loomed, one that would end the conflict, but also redefine the future. Decision 6. How to end the war. By the final years of World War II, victory was increasingly certain. The remaining question was how to bring the war to a close. Every option carried consequences. Prolonged combat meant continued loss of life. Negotiated settlements risked instability. Rapid conclusions raised ethical and political questions that would echo for generations. The decision made brought the war to an end, but not without controversy. It reshaped global power structures, accelerated political realignments, and marked the beginning of a new era defined by tension rather than peace. This was not simply an ending. It was a transition. The war stopped, but the world it created was profoundly different from the one that entered it. What these decisions reveal. When we step back, patterns emerge. Leaders constantly weighed speed against preparation, principle against survival, risk against restraint. None of these decisions were made with certainty. All were made under pressure. World War II was not shaped by a single turning point, but by a series of choices, each narrowing the range of possible futures. Some decisions prevented collapse. Others accelerated change. All of them carried consequences beyond their moment. Why this still matters. The world that emerged after World War II didn't happen by accident. International alliances, military doctrines, economic systems, they were built on the outcomes of these decisions. Modern geopolitics, global institutions, and even everyday life still reflect choices made during those years. Understanding these decisions isn't about assigning blame or praise. It's about recognizing how fragile history really is. How often the future depends not on certainty, but on judgment. Final reflection. World War II wasn't shaped by destiny. It was shaped by people. People who made choices without knowing the ending. Who acted with incomplete information. Who carried the weight of consequences they would never fully see. History didn't change because it had to. It changed because someone decided it should. And that is what makes these decisions matter, then and now. If there's a World War II decision you believe deserves its own deep dive, let me know. History is full of moments like these, and every one of them shaped the world we live in today. If you enjoyed our video, make sure to follow us for more history stories.